So we have a bit of a duck fest going on in the welterweight division between Colby Covington, Ian Garry, and Michael Venom Page, and I'm going to be breaking down that entire situation in this video. When it comes to Ian Garry's next opponent, I think a lot of people are waiting to see if he's going to get a real test in the next fight. I know that I am, and after UFC 299, I made it very clear that I think the absolute best matchup for him next would be Michael Venom Page. Now, that particular video didn't get nearly as many views as a lot of my other ones, so I'm going to be going back over a lot of the points that I made in it, but I also want to dive into the Colby Covington situation because that whole thing has escalated a lot since I made my first video about this. But before I get into all that, it takes a lot of time and effort to put these videos together, so if you don't mind, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel for the future. I would really appreciate it. Alright, so let's start off with the Ian Garry and Colby Covington situation first. I was very vocal right after UFC 299 saying that I did not think that Colby Covington wanted to fight Ian Garry, and none of the stuff that has happened since then has convinced me of anything else. I think you're falling right into Colby's plan if you believe that the videos he put out were an actual indication that he wanted that fight. I think it's the exact opposite, and all the stipulation stuff was nothing but a ruse to get people off his back. And Colby knows that there's absolutely no way all three of those things are going to be possible. So the hard reality is, Colby is definitely ducking Ian Garry. And I don't think it's because he's afraid of what would happen to him in the cage, because let's face it, Ian Garry is not really a scary guy. But I do think Colby is pretty aware that that is a tough matchup for him to actually win the fight. And I think the last thing he wants is to give somebody like Ian Garry that he despises, who's against everything that he stands for, a chance to get a win over him like that and have those bragging rights. So it is my strong belief that Colby will duck this fight until he has no choice. And I'm not saying the fight won't happen, I'm just saying if it does, it's not his choice. Now just to be clear, I would love it if that fight took place. Colby is one of only two people that I want to see Ian Garry fight next. But the primary reason that this is not my number one choice for him is that I actually don't think it's all that competitive of a fight. Ian Garry is very good at staying out of range and using distance and speed, and I think he would be able to effectively do that against Colby for the entire time limit. And as a result of that, that fight actually risks being very boring and being a lopsided decision in Ian Garry's favor. Though I will admit, unlike somebody like Jeff Neal, who has a lot of power in his hands, nobody thinks that Colby has any power in his hands, so it is possible that Ian Garry could be much more aggressive in that fight. But at the end of the day, I think he knows the risk of the takedown. I don't think he'd want to get that close. And I think he'd be perfectly happy bragging about a lopsided decision after the fact. And all of that bluster about making Covington quit and rubbing his face in the canvas and all the rest, it's all BS. So while we have Colby ducking Ian Garry, on the other hand, we have Ian Garry ducking Michael Venom Page. But in typical Ian Garry fashion, he's being a hypocrite with his arguments as to why he does not want that fight. So let's address each of them individually. First, he says he doesn't want to fight anybody that's ranked lower than him. And I have to absolutely agree with a point that Chael made in a recent video where he said, if that's the rule of thumb, if that's the metric that you go by, then there's no reason that Colby should ever give him a chance because Colby's currently ranked above Ian Garry. If that's the way that divisions worked, nobody would ever fight anyone. Also, he called out Stephen Thompson, who is ranked below him, because he said it would be a great stylistic fight and he would like to test himself against that style. Well, in Michael Venom Page, you have that same Stephen Thompson style. So if Garry really wanted to test himself against it, he'd be perfectly happy to go against MVP. However, I believe that Garry knows MVP is a taller, bigger, and perhaps much more dangerous version of Stephen Thompson, and that's exactly why he doesn't want anything to do with that fight. And now my concern is that even if he's offered that fight, he's probably going to try to avoid it. But in my opinion, there is absolutely no better matchup for Ian Garry next than Michael Venom Page, and it would be a true test of his ability as a striker and whether or not he can truly live up to the hype. I want to see Ian Garry get tested, and I don't think that Colby Covington would be the person to do that. However, I do think that MVP is the perfect person to give him a hard test, and I will say right now that if he passes that test, I will be much less critical of Ian Garry going forward. However, if we are lucky enough to get that fight, I do think that MVP would smoke Ian Garry. I would have to imagine that Ian Garry's objective in that fight would be just to survive and stay on the outside as much as he could. But with MVP's length and speed, I don't see how he would actually be able to do that. And I want to see Ian Garry tested in that type of a situation. With the exception of Neil Magny, he's always had that distance and height advantage. But with MVP, he's the same height and has a longer reach than Garry. So the bottom line with it all is that we have Colby Covington ducking Ian Garry, then we have Ian Garry ducking MVP, And the unfortunate part of it all is that it might mean we don't get any of these fights. So that's going to be it for this video. I would love to hear what you think down in the comments. Which of these fights would you prefer to see? And who do you think would be the bigger test for Ian Garry? Also, do you believe that I'm right in that Colby Covington is actually ducking Ian Garry, or do you think he's serious and wants to fight him? I will look forward to reading what you have to say. And with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thanks again for being here, and talk to you later.